Hello, and welcome to this overview of second chance romances in historical romance books. I'm Olivia, your new favorite resource for book recommendations you can easily screenshot. You're watching Random Olive Reads. So, what exactly is a second chance romance? Well, two people were previously in some sort of relationship, and it did not end happily for a variety of reasons. Now, the couple was kept apart either due to social class differences, some misunderstanding or miscommunication, or most likely family interference. Now, meeting again in the future under different circumstances may allow the two people to rekindle their relationship and communicate through all of their previous issues. Nobody's Lady by Annabelle Anders is book one of the Lord Love a Lady series. We have a misconnection here with Lily and Michael falling in love in their youth, but tragic circumstances kept Michael away from offering for Lily's hand. Not willing to wait for Michael to come around, her father forces her to marry her sister's widower and care for her niece and stepdaughter. Many years later, Lily is on her way to London for her stepdaughter's debut and runs into Michael at an inn where he needs assistance. However, at this point, he is a powerful duke and betrothed to someone else. Their paths continue to cross during the London season, but Michael is determined to stay on the honorable course, so of course he can't break his engagement. Super angsty drama in this book, and a great setup to the rest of the series. Any Rogue Will Do by Bethany Bennett is book one of the Misfits of Mayfair series. So, 7 years ago, it seemed like Ethan and Charlotte were courting, but then one day, Ethan publicly disparages her and basically ruins her reputation that season. We do find out later in the book why he does this. Now they cross paths again, and she's trying to avoid an unwanted suitor, so she recruits him as a fake fiance. Obviously, they are still attracted to each other, but still need to work out all the reasons why he ruined her all those years ago, and it has a lot to do with insecurity. Have You Any Rogues by Elizabeth Boyle is book two and a half of the Rhymes with Love series. Henrietta and Kristen are from rival families and somehow get locked in a wine cellar together. Now, this novella is told in a series of flashbacks throughout their relationship and rivalry, with many instances of them coming together and then being thwarted by outside resources. Now, this one is a quick one to read, but heavy on the pining and lost love throughout the years. Courting Trouble by Kerrigan Byrne is book two of the Good Girl series. The early part of the book takes place in the past. As a child, the coal boy of a fancy house falls in love with the eldest daughter. As a young man, he has an affair with the girl and makes plans to run away with her. When her father catches them, the man's career is threatened, so the girl cruelly pushes him away and marries someone else. The beginning of this one is very similar to, again, The Magic by Lisa Kleypas, which I will talk about later, but it basically has a fine young lady pushing away the unsuitable young man. Many years later, widowed and suffering from a gunshot wound, the lady is brought to the man who is now a renowned doctor to heal her. They're forced into each other's company and start to reconnect, but the lady still has that threatening, overbearing father, so there's still a lot of drama to be had. A Love by Design by Elizabeth Everett is book three of the Secret Scientists of London series. So, the previous book hinted at a history between George and Margaret, and we get the full story here. And this book takes place about a year and a half after the events of book two. George and Margaret and Violet, the main character of book one, were childhood friends out in the country where George was not part of the aristocracy at all. One summer, when it seemed that a romance was developing between George and Margaret, occurred instead. We do get to learn what it was at some point during the book when they finally talk it out. Now, after they parted ways, George joined the army and somehow ended up an earl, while Margaret found an engineering mentor in Paris, got married, and became widowed. Now, Margaret is back in England to start her own engineering company and is undertaking a huge project that is unfortunately funded by the nemesis of the female scientist that she's friends with. While George and Margaret are growing closer again and working out their heartbreaking past, Margaret is still holding secrets about her employer's funding and causing discourse among the female scientists. George ends up being the more emotionally mature and politically progressive one in the relationship, supporting Margaret's ambitions and providing her comfort and humor and safety. The Notorious Lord Knightley by Lorraine Heath is book two of the Chessmen series. There is a scandalous book written anonymously about the seductive exploits of a Lord Kay, and the Ton suspects that the Earl of Knightley, known as Knight, is the man in the story. In reality, he is the subject of the story, which is written by Regina, the illegitimate daughter of an earl whom Knight jilted on their wedding day 5 years prior. We do see a few chapters told from the past interspersed with the present day chapters and learn more about the past and present relationship between Knight and Regina. He basically left her heartbroken and ruined all those years ago, and she's just been trying to rebuild her life since then. Now, the notoriety of this scandalous book has drawn them back together, but there's still a lot of resentment on Regina's side of things and lots of guilt from Knight's side. It's interesting to see how they ultimately overcome the issues that kept them apart all those years ago and learning the truth about Knight's betrayal. The Princess Stakes by Amelie Howard is book one of the Daring Dukes series. After her father's murder, an Indian princess stows away on a ship headed to England. When she is caught by the ship captain, she realizes that this man is someone she had rejected once before and is now a duke. The captain obviously has a terrible grudge because of the heartbreak that the lady caused him, so he makes her do all sorts of chores on his ship to earn her keep. We do eventually learn why they were kept apart all those years ago and work towards reconciliation. However, there is still the issue of this interracial relationship that will likely be looked down upon by London society. Again, The Magic by Lisa Kleypas is considered to be the prequel to the Wallflower series, but is perfectly fine as a standalone. So Aileen has been in love with the stable boy, McKenna, since they were young. When her father, the Earl of Westcliff, finds out about their relationship, he forbids them to see each other and sends McKenna away. 12 years later, the old Earl has died, and there is a new Lord Westcliff, with sisters Aileen and Livia being unmarried and living at the estate. Now, a group of wealthy Americans have arrived for a hunting party and to gain the new Lord Westcliff's business partnership. One of those wealthy visitors, McKenna. He has been haunted by Aileen all these years, believing that she had used him and had never loved him. He comes to take his revenge by betting her and getting her out of his system. Aileen has her own issues. Not long after McKenna left, she was in a kitchen fire that left her legs scarred and disfigured. Believing that she'll never be able to find love in her scarred state, she continues to let McKenna believe that she's only interested in a physical relationship and that she doesn't love him. There is a secondary romance that happens in this book with Gideon Shaw, who has caught the attention of Livia, who hasn't been out in society since the death of her fiance a couple years ago and some related scandal. Gideon has his own problems with being an alcoholic, but since this is the secondary romance of the story, they deal with that pretty neatly. A Rogue's Rules for Seduction by Eva Lee is book three of the Last Chance Scoundrels series. We have another abandoned wedding happening here. It has been nearly a year since Dom abandoned Willa at the altar, and his friends and her brothers have conspired to bring them both to the same isolated island house party in Scotland. Now, Dom and Willa have to finally talk out their issues if they have any hope at all of moving on. And we quickly see that while they were courting and engaged, each were playing a bit of a role and mostly enjoyed the shock value of the other person's status rather than the person they really were. Since Dom has started as a dock worker and now becomes a wealthy son of a shipping magnate, he's always been considered an outsider to the aristocracy. Willa is the daughter of an earl who has been brash and outrageous, so she delighted in shocking the Ton with her brutish suitor. Dom viewed Willa as this unattainable prize who he first fell crowd to court and then felt guilty he was so far below her standing, ultimately leading to his abandonment. Now that they're in the same place again, they start to realize that they treated each other superficially during their courtship and engagement, and a marriage at that time would have been unhappy. But the spark and attraction still continues to exist between them, and now that they're being more honest with each other, they're starting to actually give in to those desires, even if they're not quite willing to risk their hearts yet. When a Marquess Loves a Woman by Vivian Lorette is book 3 of the season's original series. Now, once upon a time, Juliet and Max get caught in a scandalous kiss, which results in her being married off to a much older man before Max even has a chance to offer for her. Years later, Juliet is now a widow, and Max is somehow entangled in her same friend group, and they've got a bickering and contentious relationship. They decided to create a bet this season to see if they can predict this year's original or incomparable debutante. While they're at odds every step of the way, of course, they slowly start to fall in love again. How to Best a Marquess by Yana McGregor is book 3 of the Widow Rules series. Now, the prologue here consists of a very charming proposal from Julian to Beth, but things didn't quite turn out the way they expected. 8 years later, Beth is now one of the 3 widows to a duke's younger brother and was not, in fact, married to the scoundrel at all. In a quest to recover her lost dowry and get away from her older brother's influence, she seeks out the destitute Julian, now Marquess, for assistance. She offers him half of the money in payment. We follow with a road trip and second chance romance, even though Beth is adamant that she never marry, and she knows that her reputation will be detrimental to the honorable Julian's reputation. Julian just wants to convince Beth that he's sorry for walking away all those years ago when her brother denied his proposal and that he's still in love with her. Now, I mostly empathized with poor Julian here, who just can't catch a break. And of course, all of those road trip adventures are a fun read as well. The Mistake by Lily Maxton is book 4 of the Sisters of Scandal series. We follow the romance of Julia, a high profile courtesan, and her childhood friend. Now, she's currently pregnant with a Marquess's child and is under contract to remain his mistress in exchange for his monetary and social support of the child. Feeling disgusted with him and herself, she feigns an illness and ends up being housed at his country estate temporarily. While there, she reconnects with the head gardener, Adam, who was her childhood friend. A tragic prologue will tell you that Adam has been in love with Julia for years, but their paths diverged when she became courtesan. It's all sorts of emotional angst as these two people reconnect. The Baron's Return by Susanna Medeiros is book 7 of the Landing Lord series. Now, we have a baron who has had his heart broken when a lady cruelly rejects him and marries another person. After the heartbreak, Gideon joins the army, becomes a rake, and is generally distrustful of women. Abigail is finally out of mourning from her much older husband that her father forced her to marry. With Gideon back in England, she tells him that they have a daughter together, and then he declares that they'll marry. He has no intention of falling in love again, but she's determined to win him back. How to Deceive a Duke by Samara Parrish is book 2 of the Rebels with a Cause series. Edward and Fiona had a week-long affair once upon a time, and she didn't know he was a duke, and he thought that he could marry her. But when he told his mother, she made him break it off. And so these two dummies have been heartbroken for years and years. Now, Edward was engaged to Amelia, who was the main character of book 1, but that obviously didn't work out. And now he's single and just sort of taking care of his estate or something. Fiona gets arrested dressed as a boy at some point, and Edward goes to rescue her from jail, but has to promise to keep her at his house. And of course, the forced proximity causes them to finally talk out their issues, but they're really just still on totally different social planes. Fiona is trying to sell her inventions, but she has to dress up as a boy to do so. There's some political drama and danger with her father being the ringleader. There's a lot going on in this book, but I do like reading about how when a duke realizes that he needs to give up his status and go for who he loves. Mogul by Joanna Shoup is book 3 of the Knickerbocker Club series. It's 5 years after Lily and Calvin have parted ways, and Lily has received a threatening note about her brother that she can't read because it's in Chinese, but she seeks out Calvin for assistance because his name is also on the note. Now, this book has all sorts of plot happening, but basically, Lily and Calvin were briefly married in the past when they had eloped, but they were tracked down by her father, who threatened to have his secrets exposed. So they have to dissolve the marriage since Calvin is like technically married to somebody else, but he's not really married to somebody else. He was trying to bring his servant's wife to America from China and thought that his name would be more effective than the servant's name. Now, fast forward to 5 years later, Lily's brother is in trouble with a gang lord in Chinatown and seems to have run off with the man's daughter. There's a lot of mystery to solve here to try to protect everyone involved. So, of course, Lily and Calvin grow closer. Now, this book is heavy on the history and politics related to immigration in the US, so it was pretty interesting to read. And lastly, I will talk about The Hellion and the Hero by Emily Sullivan, which is book 3 of the League of Scoundrels series. We have a second chance romance between a widow and a supposed war hero. Georgiana has been running her business after her husband's death and providing factory reform for the workers, but suddenly she's being threatened by a competitor. Now, her brother has hired a retired Navy captain to help protect her, but that captain was a former suitor who she passed over to marry her late husband. Now, these two are stuck together despite being resentful of their history with each other and somehow work it out to find their way to common ground. Thank you so much for watching this video. Links to all of these books are in the description box. Like and subscribe so you don't miss future videos, and you can follow me on Instagram at randomolive.